Good afternoon, everybody. I'm used to doing this much earlier. I want to welcome everybody. We have a lot of new people coming today. Welcome to Twitchy Woman. I hope that you will join us again in the future. We've got a lot of exciting programs coming up. And I also want to thank everybody who emailed me or called to see how I was doing after my dog bite. I am doing just fine. It was just another misadventure with Parkinson's. But we have lots going on, and I want to start by introducing our wonderful speaker, who I think everybody knows about. Our speaker, Dr. Ray Dorsey, is the director of the Center for Brain and the Environment at the Atria Health and Research Institute. The center's mission is to identify the root cause of brain diseases from autism to Alzheimer's so that we can prevent them. With his colleagues, he wrote Ending Parkinson's Disease and the forthcoming The Parkinson's Plan, which will be out next month, which details a new path to preventing and treating this terrible disease. And I'm going to stop screen sharing. So Ray previously directed the Center for Health and Technology at the University of Rochester. He chaired the International Huntington Study Group, led the Movement Disorders Division at Johns Hopkins, and consulted for McKinsey & Company. In 2015, the White House recognized Ray as a champion for change for Parkinson's disease. And I've met Ray. He is very tall. In fact, he goes by the tall neurologist. And he's a wonderful speaker. You're going to enjoy him. So I have a few things I want to go over with you. Tell you, the format's going to be a little different today. I'm going to be interviewing Ray rather than him doing a formal presentation. I was fortunate to be sent an advance copy of the new book, and this quote is going to be on the back page on the back cover, if I remember correctly. They asked me to give them a quote, so I wrote this: "We can no longer accept that Parkinson's is simply inevitable. The Parkinson's Plan challenges that narrative with science, urgency, and hope, offering a path toward preventing and ultimately ending this disease. As someone living with Parkinson's, I found this book both empowering and energizing. It speaks directly to those of us who are demanding more than management. We want answers, accountability, and action." Okay, so I'm going to start out with a personal question. In 2015, I went to my first World Parkinson's Congress in Portland. And the late, great Tom Isaacs, who some of you may remember, was the keynote speaker at the opening session. And he made a comment that has stuck with me ever since then, where he talked about the cure for PD was always a moving target. When he asked when there would be a cure for Parkinson's, he was always told 5 years. As time passed, he was told 5 years over and over and over again. So in your new book, I found it interesting that you lay out your timeline for Parkinson's treatments and cures in 5-year segments, but you do it in a different way. Than he was just talking about a cure, and it just kept moving and moving and moving. And people keep asking me, when are we going to have a cure? I said, well, maybe it's down to 4 years. Who knows? But you've broken it down into three 5-year segments. So can you tell us about this? Do you think we've actually made some progress to get to the second 5-year predictions?
So first of all, Sharon, thank you very much for having me. Sharon is an incredibly powerful advocate for the Parkinson's community, and it's people like Sharon who will change the course of this disease so that in future generations, we're not talking about Parkinson's disease as one of the world's fastest growing brain diseases. We're talking about Parkinson's as one of the fastest declining diseases. And I'm thankful to be with all of you today. So our book, The Parkinson's Plan, lays out 4 things. It's PLAN. One, how to prevent the disease. Second is to learn why the disease begins. Third is to amplify the voices of people who are affected, like all of you. And fourth is to navigate the new frontiers of treatment. And many of you are probably interested in a cure for Parkinson's disease. And we don't speak about cures too much, but we say, if you want to cure a disease, you must first learn why it started. I can't think of many diseases that we can cure in medicine where we don't know what the cause is. And I think we first need to figure out what the cause of a disease is, and then we can readily, prevent people from getting the disease, 2, slow the rate of progression, and 3, cure the disease. And I'll give you an example that we have in the book. Some of you might remember, or young enough to remember, that bleeding ulcers used to be a major cause of disability. It's actually one of the top 10 leading causes of death in the United States. And I don't know if do people remember what people thought caused bleeding ulcers? People remember what thought caused bleeding ulcers? People thought it was stress. And so they told you to stop working, get a new job. Um, they did radical surgeries and all types of things. It turned out that scientists said that it wasn't stress, it was bacteria. And they were ridiculed and told that this couldn't be, bacteria couldn't possibly live in an acidic environment like the stomach. Of course, they were right, and now we treat ulcers, bleeding ulcers, with antibiotics and some acid suppressors, and almost no one dies of a bleeding ulcer anymore. And there are other examples. Hepatitis C, even when I was in medical school 25 years ago, people weren't exactly sure what it was. It used to be called non-Hep A, non-Hep B. And it turned out hepatitis C was due to a different virus than hepatitis A and B. And now we can take a pill and we can cure hepatitis C. Something unfathomable when I was in medical school, that you would take a pill and cure hepatitis C. When I was in medical school, the treatment was liver transplant. So we first need to learn why people have the disease. And the central thrust of the book is that for most individuals, not all, but for most individuals with Parkinson's disease, the cause are chemicals in our food, water, and air. And those chemicals are certain pesticides, especially a pesticide called paraquat, certain chemicals, including a dry cleaning chemical called trichloroethylene, a really simple molecule. It's the same molecule that's at the Marine base Camp Lejeune that some of you are reading about, and high amounts of outdoor air pollution. So when Dr. Parkinson described Parkinson's disease in 1817, he said, I'm describing something that's not been classified in medical literature, something new. And so it begs the question, well, what was new in 1800 in London? And what was new was air pollution. Air quality in 1800 London is equivalent to what Delhi, India has today. It's equivalent to what the skies over the Big Apple, where I'm sitting right now, 2 years ago when the skies over the Big Apple turned orange because of the Canadian wildfires. So in the book, we highlight what are the environmental causes, principal causes of the disease. We need to answer why we get it, and then once we have that answer, we can get more effective treatments. And Michael Oken, my outstanding partner in writing the book, outlines 3 frontiers of treatments: what we can expect in the next 5 years in the near term, what we can expect in the midterm, 5 to 10 years, and what we can expect in the longer term, more than 10 years. And we try hard not to give you false hope, but we give you really concrete actions that you can take to what we think to slow the rate of progression of the disease, actions your family members can take to prevent them from ever getting Parkinson's disease, and then and call for investments so that we can get better treatments to you faster.
Okay, well, you kind of answered my next question, but you stated that you must find the cause to treat the patient, and we know that there are many different causes, as you said. For example, I think personally that riding my bike behind the mosquito abatement trucks as a kid in the Midwest was the culprit. And I know some of you, others of you feel the same way. Raise your hands if you think that you were poisoned by mosquito trucks, or whatever it may be. So, there's quite a few people who feel that way. We know that some people have the gene mutations. They're not a huge portion, and I don't know what sets theirs off. So if you know what's caused your Parkinson's, go ahead and put it in the chat. We're curious to see what everybody says. So my question to you, well, I think you've answered it. Does it really matter what was the cause? Do you treat patients differently depending on what caused their Parkinson's?
So let's talk about the causes of Parkinson's disease. So there's a great study called PD Generation led by the Parkinson's Foundation. Some of you probably participated in it, and they're offering free genetic counseling and free genetic testing for over 10,000 people with Parkinson's disease to see what proportion carry a genetic cause like LRRK2 or genetic factor like called GBA. And it turns out that of the first 10,000 people, about 8,000 were able to be analyzed, and 12.5% carried either a mutation in a gene responsible for Parkinson's, Parkin, LRRK2, or genetic risk factor such as GBA. Said another way, 87% of Americans with Parkinson's disease participating in the study have nothing to do with any known genetic cause or genetic risk factor of the disease. 87% of Americans have nothing to do with any known genetic cause or genetic risk factor for the disease. Begs the question, well, what's causing it? And I think for Americans, now this varies. I see someone from Guatemala, and I think it varies by geography. If you lived in rural areas, I get really concerned about pesticides. You mentioned the DDT trucks. So many of you are young enough to remember Rachel Carson, and she wrote the book Silent Spring in 1962. And she wasn't writing against pesticides. She was writing against the indiscriminate use of pesticides. DDT in World War II saved millions of people from getting malaria. But after World War II, it was used indiscriminately. It was sprayed on children on the beaches in Atlantic City. It was sprayed on Sharon when she was riding her bicycle behind the mosquito truck. And DDT and pesticides that belong to that class in the lab damage the dopamine-producing nerve cells that we know are lost in Parkinson's disease. And human studies appear to be associated with an increased risk of the disease. And many of them are fat soluble. They dissolve in fat. And so they are even pesticide called heptachlor, which we talk about in the book, has been found in the brains of individuals with Parkinson's disease. So we know that there are certain pesticides that are linked to a much higher risk of disease and likely cause the disease. In addition, there are other causes like trichloroethylene, which is a dry cleaning chemical. I saw someone, I think in Arizona, who was exposed to it. If you want to email me your story, you can just email me at info@endingpd.org. This is how I learn, and this is how we get our stories, is from people like you. Info@endingpd.org. We'll send you a free copy of our first book. Any of Sharon's guests who can't afford a copy of this book and would like to receive one, they can just email us at info@endingpd.org. Even if you can't afford it, we'll send it to you. info@endingpd.org. So what to do? If you knew the cause, what does that mean for the person? So I'll give you an analogy. If a smoker comes in and is diagnosed with lung cancer, what's the first thing the doctor is going to tell him to do?
Stop smoking.
Stop smoking. But if a farmer comes in with Parkinson's disease, what's the first thing that the neurologist should be telling them to do? So I think one thing is finding out the cause is to, one, make sure you're not getting exposed to it ongoingly. And so some of you, like Sharon, may say, hey, my exposure was in the remote past. Some of you may not be in the remote past. Some of you may be drinking well water, for example, which we know are wells. 1 in 8 Americans get their water from wells, prone to pesticide contamination associated with increased risk of Parkinson's. Well, maybe we should be putting one water filter on your faucet right now. And 2, we should be testing your wells, not just for bacteria, which is what's usually done, but also for pesticides or other industrial chemicals. So I think if you know why you had the disease, it gives you a good sense of, we should make sure that you're not having ongoing exposure. I don't know, but I wonder, for example, if some people who have a faster rate of progression of disease versus those who have a slower rate of progression, where the people who have the faster rate of progression are still being exposed to the chemical. They're the ones with lung cancer who are still smoking the cigarettes. So in the book, we give you 25 recommendations to decrease your risk of exposure to toxicants that likely cause or likely lead to faster rate of progression of the disease. If you stop getting exposed to these toxicants, you can prevent the disease. Second, unfortunately, some of these chemicals aren't just associated with Parkinson's disease. So some pesticides, for example, are associated with an increased risk of skin cancer. And some of you hopefully know that Parkinson's is associated with increased risk of skin cancer. I'm not sure if Parkinson's is causing the skin cancer. I think it could be the common chemical pesticide is causing both Parkinson's and both skin cancer. So maybe people like Sharon, and Sharon's, fair skin, pick on Sharon a little bit, needs to be especially attuned to like wearing a large hat when she's outside, wearing sunscreen, and seeing a dermatologist.
Just as an FYI, I've had all 3 kinds. I have had the trifecta of skin cancers.
So
and
maybe we can do more to preventing people with Parkinson's from getting these other consequences. And maybe we as neurologists like me are failing to adequately inform people. Trichloroethylene, which one person highlighted, is known to cause cancer. There's no question about it. EPA says it causes cancer. The World Health Organization says it causes cancer. Department of Health and Human Services causes cancer, and it causes certain cancers, and everything from multiple myeloma, breast cancer, especially in men, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, I'm forgetting one, liver cancer, renal cell carcinoma, and maybe we should be screening people. So if you figure out why you have the disease, it opens an entirely new window into slowing the rate of progression, preventing it for future generations. Maybe if you're like Sharon and got it from pesticide exposure, if you figure out that what it is, then you can give some reassurance to your kids that if they don't get exposed to pesticides, then their risk of Parkinson's might be lower than would otherwise be expected. And then if you know what the cause of the disease is, then you can study it in laboratory animals and screen compounds against it and get to treatments faster, just like we did for peptic ulcer disease and just like we did for hepatitis C.
Okay. What about living near a golf course or on a golf course?
Yeah. So my outstanding colleague, Dr. Brittany Krzyzanowski, is a geographer, and she's at the Barrow Neurological Institute. And she and her colleagues at Mayo Clinic and with my little tiny help looked at the risk of Parkinson's among residents of Rochester, Minnesota, who live near a golf course. And she did this because Rochester, Minnesota does a really good job of tracking who develops Parkinson's disease. And so she had that data. Then she overlaid that with maps of golf courses and then overlaid that with maps of water supply. And she found that in Rochester, Minnesota, individuals who live near a golf course have a 126% increased risk of developing Parkinson's. Individuals who live within 1 mile of a golf course had a 126% increased risk of Parkinson's. Now, why is that? Not sure. But golf courses use pesticides up to 80 times the amount that are used on farms. And many of the pesticides that have been commonly used on golf courses have been associated with Parkinson's disease, especially a pesticide called chlorpyrifos, widely used on apples, for example. And then Dr. Krzyzanowski thought it could be due to the water supply, and she looked at the water data, and it appears that people who got their water supply from near these golf courses had a higher risk. I'm not sure if it's the water supply. I get really concerned about people like Sharon breathing in the pesticides when they're sprayed on golf courses or sprayed on a truck. I think that remains to be determined. It could be both. It could be either or. It could depend on the person, what their source of their water supply is, especially if it's a private well or not. But I think there are increasing number of studies that are linking people who simply work or live near where pesticides like paraquat are sprayed have an increased risk of developing disease. The analogy I like to use is just like secondhand smoke. We know that people who work with pesticides, like green space workers, like farmers, have an increased risk of Parkinson's, those who work with certain pesticides. But it may not just affect those people, but it might affect people who around them. Just like if you're smoking a cigarette, you're at higher risk for lung cancer, but so is the person next to you, in many cases, women.
Okay. I love the personal stories that you use in the book. And you actually followed several of them throughout the book, such as Sarah, and I forget the other woman's name. How were you able to find all these interesting people with these stories? And would you like to read some passages from the book?
So I'll read you the beginning of the book.
Okay.
First of all, thank you. Introduction. It takes as much energy to wish as it does to plan, from Eleanor Roosevelt. Athletics, military service, medicine, and Parkinson's disease have connected the lives of Jana Reed and Sarah Winningham in unforeseen ways. 30 years ago, as young, talented, ambitious cadets, they met on the U.S. Air Force Academy's idyllic track at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. Jana was from the California coastal town of San Luis Obispo, and Sarah came from Steamboat Springs, Colorado. Jana, who was a year older, was a hurdler and long jumper for the Academy in Colorado Springs, while Sarah ran long distances. Both women majored in biochemistry and were accepted to top medical schools. Jana at Georgetown, Sarah at Tulane. Jana's ability to navigate obstacles made emergency medicine a natural fit, and Sarah's stamina sent her into anesthesiology. After completing their medical training, they served throughout the United States and around the world, including in Afghanistan. In 2016, Jana noticed something strange. When she propped up her feet, her left toes would shake. She thought it was a leftover symptom from an old injury. So like many physicians, she just blew it off. However, over the next 2 years, while she was working nights in the emergency room, other symptoms began to emerge, and nurses started to notice. They came to her almost apologetically with their concerns. One whispered, "I noticed your arm was really shaking when you put on your gown." Another sidelined her and said, "Hey, I noticed you are moving really slow and stiff. Are you injured?" One more said, "You're walking funny, like shuffling. Are you okay?" Her friends thought she was sad because her face seldom produced a smile. Jana blamed fatigue, exhaustion, and menopause, anything but Parkinson's. Eventually, she saw a neurologist via telemedicine who diagnosed her with a disabling disease. She was 47. Jana decided to stop working shifts in the emergency department because she was concerned that her slowness and stiffness wouldn't let her keep up with the unpredictable pace, and she worried about making a mistake. She started working in smaller clinics, which hasn't been as satisfying, and because she's had less training there, she finds it stressful. At about the same time that nurses were becoming concerned about Jana, Sarah's health caught the eye of a surgeon, her husband, Dr. John Langle. One day, John told her, "Your arm's shaking." Sarah thought this was strange. Why would I have a one-sided resting arm tremor? The physician did what many people do. She Googled it. Two terrifying words kept coming up. Parkinson's disease. I'm going to skip ahead. Following their shared diagnosis, the two classmates connected. The resilient pair were both stunned by the news, struggling with diagnosis, falling out of shape, and seeking answers. But they helped each other. Jana completed intense physical therapy following a hamstring injury and was able to exercise again. She even had a new walking partner, a black lab named Apollo. Sarah also learned the benefits of exercise and participated in a clinical trial involving cycling. Soon the mother of two was back on the road to health and determined to return to racing form. Jana and Sarah were both in their 40s, fit, active, in the prime of their careers when Parkinson's knocked at the door. How could they be diagnosed at such a young age? Why did it happen to them in the same month? Why, as they discovered, has it also affected some of their fellow Air Force Academy classmates? And
There's
so,
more stories like that throughout the book. You found people I've never heard of, and I don't know how you get all these people. I mean, you asked today, if anybody has a story to let you know. We all
yeah,
do.
so we listen. This disease is not going to change its course unless people most directly affected, most familiar, most intimate with the disease, they make their voices heard. Listen, I'm speaking of mainly women. In 1980, Candace Lightner changed the course of drinking and driving after a drunk driver struck and killed her 13-year-old daughter as she was walking across the street. And she formed 4 days after her daughter was killed, she forms the beginnings of what became Mothers Against Drunk Driving. 8 years after she found her voice, drinking and driving it became illegal in all 50 states. It wasn't illegal in all 50 states in 1980. Drinking ages raised from 18 to 21. Blood alcohol levels dropped to 0.10. And 10,000 fewer Americans die per year in drinking and driving accidents because of Candace Lightner, and likely many of you who are part of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I think we need to do exactly the same thing here. Is we tell the stories, and there's people who share their stories. We should be thankful to them. Thankful to Sarah Winningham and Jana Reed, because they show a lot of courage. It takes a lot of guts to share your story, and it takes a lot of trust to entrust your story to people like Michael and me. And hopefully we've done right by them and share their stories. In a few cases, we've concealed at the request of the individuals their identity. But the vast majority of the stories in the book are of people like you who have the disease, who don't want it to affect their children, who want to find better treatments and ways of slowing the progression for themselves. And I think in some sense are really frustrated with the status quo. We have not answered the bell. in the 21st century. We've had no major therapeutic breakthroughs for Parkinson's this century. Parkinson's is one of the world's fastest growing brain diseases. Many people, only 9% of people with Parkinson's see a Parkinson's specialist. There are many people around in the United States and around the world who aren't diagnosed with the disease, and many people don't have access to levodopa. Michael and I view these as failures of us. We have failed as a Parkinson's community, as Parkinson's neurologists, to successfully address the disease. And so we put forth a detailed plan for what individuals can do, what communities can do, and what societies can do to slow, treat, and prevent the disease. And we do that through what we hope are compelling stories backed by strong evidence.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I'm going to switch gears now. We've been hearing about the promise of stem cells to treat Parkinson's for at least 20 years. Do you think this is still a pipe dream, or with the CRISPR technology getting better and better, can we really look forward to it soon to a day when this becomes a reality for treating PD?
Yeah, so I'm going to show you a picture. So in chapters 8 and 9 are about treatments, and we give you the treatment horizons, what treatments you can expect in the next 5 years, next 5 to 10 years, and next 10 to 15 years. And Michael largely wrote these chapters. And he talks about stem cells in the midterm as rejuvenating stem cells, something that they expect in the next 6 to 10 years. So there were stem cell treatments. Many of you, some of you might even participate in studies over 10 years ago, in which embryonic stem cells from embryo, were transplanted into the brains of individuals, surgically transplanted into the brains of individuals to see if these stem cells could produce dopamine that's lost, and therefore treat many of the symptoms of the disease. Mixed results, but largely was found not to be as efficacious as hope. I think there's hope that these treatments might have a second life, and many people are trying to investigate them, and Michael walks you through the research on that front. It's worth, I know there are lots of people offering stem cell treatments, IV treatments, injections into your spinal fluid and stuff. I think Michael and I would both say you want to be cautious about that. Stem cells work because you need to get them into the right place in the right location, and putting something in your bloodstream may not get to your brain. And putting things in your spinal fluid can risk infection and can risk, other complications. So I think we're very concerned and I think very cautious about some of the existing therapies, but in the midterm, through appropriate clinical trials, I think we think it's an avenue worth investigating.
Okay, right. Yeah, I know the blood-brain barrier is part of the issue. The stem cells don't survive. And I know I've read a lot about you have to find a delivery system, I guess, is part of the problem. There just isn't an adequate delivery system for the stem cells to survive. I have one last question, and we've been hearing stories about AI being used to diagnose Parkinson's. And in fact, your co-author, Michael Oken, along with other researchers at the University of Florida and the UF Health Norman Fixel Institute for Neurological Diseases, have developed a new kind of software that will help clinicians differentially diagnose Parkinson's disease and related conditions, reducing diagnostic time and increasing precision beyond 96%. This study was published recently in JAMA Neurology and was funded by the National Institute of Health. So my last question is, how does AI fit into your plan for future diagnosis and treatment, and dare I say, a cure?
So I think, again, the cure, we got to know what the cause is. It's almost a bit of arrogance to think we're going to cure a disease where we don't know its cause. And I can think of really few conditions. If people can think of a condition that we can cure medically where we don't know its cause, let me know, because I'm still looking. Steroids might cure some things without us actually knowing the cause, but I think it's hard. I think it's really got great potential for diagnosing. I think all of you have seen people walking on the streets in your churches, in your schools, in your communities that have Parkinson's disease, and it's quite frankly not too hard to diagnose the disease once you know what you're looking for. And I think it's likely that in the near term, that technologies, everything from smartwatches to smartphones to invisible sensors to videos, are going to be able to identify who has Parkinson's disease or who's not. You're going to have smart beds and smart toilets and smartphones and smart homes, I think, that are going to identify people that have a high likelihood of having Parkinson's or another Parkinsonian disorder. Differentiating out which kind of Parkinsonian disorder might be more challenging, but I think that's on the near term. Michael again talks about how AI can help us identify new treatments for the disease, and I think there's potential there to help improve drug development. I think in the near term, I think we're going to see very powerful ways to identify people with or at high risk for Parkinson's disease using everyday technologies that many of us carry around everywhere we go.
Well, thank you. Did you have one last statement you want to make before we open it up to questions?
Yeah, so we put I think books are gifts, and I always say when I read, I like to read books, and I always think I'm getting the best of someone, at least 2 years of their life to do so. And we put together a lot of things. We didn't get to talk about the Parkinson's 25 that much, which we have here at the back of the book. And I'll just read you the introduction to the Parkinson's 25. Here are 25 actions to lower your risk of Parkinson's. For most with the disease, some may even slow progression. Most apply to all of us, regardless of age, sex, disability, or geography. These recommendations may be especially important for those with a family history of Parkinson's, those at genetic risk, and those who've been exposed to toxic chemicals. Let's all live longer, healthier lives and say goodbye to Parkinson's disease. And the number one recommendation that I think some of you have seen is to wash your produce, even your organic ones, and we tell you what to wash it with and why to wash it. We give you very actions that almost all of us can take that are relatively inexpensive, relatively accessible to all of us, to possibly slow the rate of progression in this audience and prevent it for your children and other loved ones. We also put out 3 goals, and the 3 goals are modeled on the UN AIDS goals in 2013, which were 90-90-90. They said that by 2020, 90% of HIV will be diagnosed with the condition, 90% of people diagnosed will be treated with appropriate therapies, and 90% of those treated with appropriate medications will have the virus suppressed in their bloodstream. Michael and I put out 0, 10, and 100 goals. By 2035, in 10 years from now, the global rise of Parkinson's disease, adjusted for age, will be 0%. That by 2035, if we follow the recommendations in the book, that we can get to the point where Parkinson's disease is no longer rising, but has plateaued. And by 2036, that we start talking about the fall of Parkinson's disease. The second goal is 10, that by 2035, we increase funding for Parkinson's research tenfold, and we devote 10 times as much to prevention as we currently do now. Right now, only 2 cents of every Parkinson's research dollar is aimed at preventing the disease. Homes in New York City, in Miami, Florida, and Los Angeles are routinely sold for more money than we as a society spend on trying to prevent the disease. We need to change that. And the third goal, and one of Michael's favorite, is 100, that by 2035, 100% of people with Parkinson's disease have access to levodopa. We don't find it socially acceptable that people with HIV go without appropriate treatment for their condition. We should not find it socially acceptable that people with Parkinson's disease go without access to levodopa. But I think we have a chance, our generation, everyone here, to create a world where Parkinson's disease is increasingly rare. And I think we quite frankly have a chance over the next generation to make it so that Parkinson's disease largely disappears. And I'll give you another example. Many of you are young enough to remember about HIV appearing in the 1980s. The incidence of HIV today is lower than it's been at any point since 1990. If we must continue to fund efforts aimed at preventing the disease and treating people with it, it's likely that HIV will disappear as a major clinical entity in our lifetime. If we can do that for HIV, I think we can do that for Parkinson's disease. But it's going to require people like the Twitchy women and people from Los Angeles and from Evanston, Illinois, and from Florida and from Guatemala to make their voices heard. and demand the change. Michael and I spent a lot of time putting forth a plan. Chapter 10 actually gives you a plan for preventing, slowing, and treating the disease. If we take up this call of action, we can give a gift to future generations, give our children a world largely free of Parkinson's disease. Many of us are parents, and I think one of the responsibilities of parents is if something bad happens to us, it's our responsibility to make sure it doesn't happen to our kids. And I'm hopeful that this book will help us do exactly that.
All right. So, questions. One question was about the DOGE cuts and the administration affecting research.
So the new administration, part of their thing was to make America healthy again. And I think there's an increasing recognition that chemicals in our food, water, and air are contributing to chronic diseases. And the poster child for chronic diseases, in my mind, is Parkinson's disease. We need to hold our elected officials accountable to the promises that they've made. And so if chemicals like pesticides are contributing to chronic conditions in children, as the Make America Healthy report suggests, is the case, I think it's also contributing to Parkinson's disease and adult onset diseases. And we need to hold the administration accountable for addressing the underlying root causes of chronic diseases, whether they happen in children or whether they happen in adults. And if we don't, that's a failure on us to hold our representatives accountable. And I think we just need to make our voices heard. Why is paraquat a weed killer that's associated with a 150% increased risk Parkinson's disease banned in China, but permitted to be sprayed in increasing amounts in the United States and almost every state in the union? We just need to make our voices heard. Politicians are reactive. They're not proactive. They're generally reactive. They respond to the needs and interests of their constituents. And we have, as a community, I think, including neurologists like me, failed to make our voices adequately heard on the subject.
Elizabeth, can you unmute yourself?
What do you think? My dad had an assistant. My mom has Parkinson. I have Parkinson. I thought the genetic test, and among the genes, the gene therapy looks for it. Came back negative, salió negativo, negative.
Buenas tardes. So the vast majority of people with Parkinson's disease do not carry genetic risk for the disease. I think we just need to realize that the predominant, if you look at the heritability of diseases, some diseases are very heritable, type 1 diabetes, schizophrenia, they run in families. At the bottom of the list are diseases like Parkinson's disease. So if we keep thinking that Parkinson's disease is predominantly a genetic cause, we're never going to get to a cure. At best, you're going to get to a cure a small portion of people with Parkinson's disease, but the vast majority of people won't be addressed by it. So diseases can run in families without genetic causes, because not only do families share the same genes, but they often share the same environment. So obviously I can't tell you right now why members of your family have been affected, but are people drinking the same well water that's prone to be contaminated by pesticides? Are they living near farms or agricultural workers? Are they working in similar environments or same jobs? So there are lots and lots of reasons why people in the same family can have the disease that where genetics is not the primary explanation.
Thank you. Let's see, from Barbara, she was diagnosed in 2016, recently diagnosed with uterine cancer. The biopsy indicated an overabundance of a genetic mutation known as P53. She's read some research indicating this mutation is also found in Parkinson's. So her question, I don't know what is the mechanism of getting PD from environmental toxins? Could those cause the mutation P53? And why is there not more research on this particular mutation?
I'm not an oncologist, so I'll give you a brief thing on cancer, and then we'll talk about mechanism. So people with lung cancer or smoking, they accumulate mutations, and if you accumulate enough mutations in different pathways, it can lead to unregulated growth of tumors. And P53 is an important gene, I think, for suppressing the growth of tumors, suppressing growth. And if you mutate that gene, which is commonly mutated in lots of different cancers, you can have unregulated cell growth. Now, what's the mechanism by which chemicals cause Parkinson's disease? Almost all the chemicals I highlighted to you, the certain pesticides, trichloroethylene is a common dry cleaning chemical, perchloroethylene, and air pollution, all damage the energy-producing parts of cells called mitochondria. Your brain is only about 2% of your body weight, but 20% of your energy consumption. And nerve cells, neurons, drive 75% of the energy consumption. And if you think about the cells that produce dopamine, the dopaminergic neurons in the substantia nigra, that part that's damaged in Parkinson's disease, they have huge energy demands. If you stretched them out, they would be 4 meters in length, twice my height. And they're not insulated. They don't have myelin as their covering. So they have enormous energy demands. So chemicals that damage the energy producing parts of cells, these neurons might be especially susceptible, especially vulnerable to the to chemicals that damage the mitochondria. One of my colleagues said these cells are basically like huge garbage bags and they're filled with jelly beans, and those jelly beans are the mitochondria. So these chemicals, certain pesticides, dry cleaning chemicals, and air pollution may be damaging those jelly beans, and those jelly beans are found in nerve cells, especially the nerve cells that are damaged in Parkinson's disease.
Okay. Are there any studies that indicate heavy metals may trigger Parkinson's?
Yes, we actually tell you the story of Pope John Paul II and why he may have gotten Parkinson's disease. And I'll give you a little preview. So the question is, why has the Pope get Parkinson's? And it turns out that in World War II, the Pope, who was Polish, Poland was occupied by Germany, and he was sent to a labor camp. And he had to do mining at this mine in Poland. And he had to go deep down, evidently, into the mine. And it turned out that mine, as I found out doing research, was high in a concentration of metal called manganese. And it turns out manganese is associated with a different Parkinsonian disorder that may have affected Pope John Paul II. So there are numerous studies suggesting that heavy metals, either from exposure through occupation or perhaps through air pollution. So when you're looking in Los Angeles and you see smog, you're seeing little pieces of dirt and soot suspended in the air. And most of those pieces of dirt and soot we cough out or sneeze out. But some are so small that they can penetrate the nerve responsible for smell that hangs down in the upper part of our nasal passages. And that particulate matter can go all the way back to the smell center of our brain, where the pathology in many cases of Parkinson's likely begins. And hitchhiking on that particulate matter are often metals. Lead from leaded gasoline, iron from brakes, platinum from catalytic converters. And it turns out people with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease have high concentrations of metal in their brain, and no one's exactly sure why, but I get very concerned about people breathing in these heavy metals into their brains.
There's a question from Mark Wells about DBS, but I'm going to defer and ask him to speak to you after we're finished. That was more of a personal question. Tamara asked about paraquats. Was paraquat sprayed on marijuana in the 70s?
Yes, and so the answer is yes. And so coming out of Vietnam, where we sprayed Agent Orange over the North Vietnamese and exposed lots of veterans to Agent Orange, which is linked to Parkinson's disease. Some of you may know that General Colin Powell, who did 2 tours of duty during the Vietnam War, one in 1963, in which he sprayed Agent Purple, so named because there was a purple stripe around the barrel, and more concentrated form of Agent Orange, developed both Parkinson's disease and multiple myeloma, both of which have been linked to Agent Orange. Importantly, as you know, is that the diseases that Parkinson's disease and many cancers don't develop immediately after exposure, but years or decades later, because it likely takes years or decades or even generations for the diseases to unfold and for the symptoms to become present. So was paraquat sprayed on marijuana? So following that, in the 1970s, as part of their war on drugs, the U.S. sprayed paraquat on marijuana plants in Mexico and in marijuana plants, I believe, in Georgia. And these marijuana plants sprayed with paraquat made their way into the United States. So Americans smoking marijuana plants in the 1970s were not just being exposed to marijuana, but also likely to paraquat. Those of you who like the movie The Big Lebowski, there's even a little reference to it. And we talked quite a bit about paraquat in our book.
We've got a whole bunch of unrelated questions here. I'm just gonna read several of them, and I've got one person with a hand raised, and then we're gonna wrap things up. Can bipolar condition cause Parkinson's? A lack of dopamine in the substantia nigra both can cause hallucinations and disease and delusions. Another one. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, so bipolar, unlikely. It's common that many of the medications used to treat bipolar disease, such as valproic acid or antipsychotics, can cause a medication, can induce symptoms of Parkinsonism, what looks like Parkinson's, especially antipsychotics can cause people to look like they have Parkinsonism. And in this case, obviously, the treatment for those individuals is not levodopa, but to stop using antipsychotic or use an antipsychotic that's less likely to produce those effects. The importance of learning why people have the disease. Valproic acid can also cause tremor and also can lead to confusion and difficulty with diagnosis. Again, figuring out why someone has the disease can lead to the appropriate treatment. So if you get diagnosed with a condition, Parkinson's or anything, ask your doctor why you got it. Because if you find why, you're one step closer to curing it, you're one step closer to slowing its progression, and you're one step closer to preventing it for others.
Sue Brownlees asks if you know what the global statistics are for environmental causes of Parkinson's. Example, the USA versus the UK.
We don't have great data on like this. I think in part because one, we don't have great data on actually how many people have Parkinson's disease. Our first recommendation is that we need to measure it carefully because what gets measured gets managed. And right now we're not measuring Parkinson's disease well. One of our additional recommendations and alludes to some of the things we need to start measuring these chemicals in the bodies of people with and without Parkinson's disease. If we find out, for example, as some studies have suggested, that people with Parkinson's disease have high levels of pesticides in their body, that would get us a lot closer to figuring out definitively what's causing the disease, and then we can take steps to minimize ongoing or future exposure to disease and perhaps see if there are ways to reverse it. The studies are pretty consistent across the world. I mentioned the PD generation study saying that 12.5% of people have a genetic cause. Another study called the Ronstock study in Europe, the Americas, and the Middle East found that 14% of people with Parkinson's disease carry a genetic cause or genetic risk factor, again, suggesting that the vast majority, over 85%, don't. And so I think that's pretty good, is that 85 and 90% of people with Parkinson's disease do not carry an underlying genetic cause or genetic risk factor for the disease, suggesting that environmental causes are the predominant ones. The exact causes, I think, varies by geography. In the United States, I get most concerned about trichloroethylene, and I talk a lot about that in the book. In other parts of the world, it might be air pollution. In other parts of the world, sub-Saharan Africa today, it might be pesticides. So I think it varies. In the United Kingdom, 1 in 12 workers worked with trichloroethylene, widely used in degreasing. Painters, printers, embalmers, mechanics, electronics workers worked with it. So I would probably worry a lot about trichloroethylene in the United Kingdom, for example.
Okay. One last question from Sharon. You want to go unmute yourself, Sharon?
Yes, thank you. Ray, thank you for an amazing, and Sharon for an amazing Q&A. I'm in that 14%, 14% of people that do have the mutation. I'm about 1.5 years into my journey. I'm terrified because not so much for myself, but because I have 3 children in their early 20s who were all raised in Los Angeles, which till not that long ago had the second worst air pollution, I think, outside of Beijing. I live in what I thought was a good neighborhood, except that I'm within a mile of 2 golf courses, one at a private club and one at a public municipal golf course, and have had a lot of clothes dry cleaned over a long period of time. And I guess my question is, Actually, two of my kids live in Los Angeles. Are the risk factors or the penetrance factors similar in terms of environmental triggers or environmental causes to your knowledge? I have one sibling, he has Parkinson's, neither of our parents did. And so I don't know a direct correlation, familial correlation, obviously, other than my sibling. And I'm trying to find out more about getting involved in the LRRK2 world. I have not yet found a study that I could participate in, but if you have anything to speak to that, I would be most appreciative.
Yeah, so we give you some things that your children can do and you can do. So it turns out people with Parkinson's disease, we know that there are factors that are associated with an increased risk of progression. So for example, you mentioned Los Angeles air pollution. Among individuals with Parkinson's disease, those exposed to high levels of air pollution have an increased risk of hospitalization and an increased risk of death. And so recommendation 10 from Parkinson's 25 is consider air purifiers. Air purifiers are an easy and effective way to lower your risk of a disease from indoor air pollution. Air purifiers do range in costs as low as $10 to as high as $1,000, require periodic cleaning and filter changes, and may need to be installed in multiple places depending on the size of your home, school, or workplace. Be sure to use air purifiers with carbon filters designed to remove volatile organic chemicals like TCE. Number 16, roll up your windows in traffic. Traffic-related air pollution like that found on congested highways is associated with an increased risk of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Next time you find yourself stuck in traffic or traveling through a tunnel full of cars, roll up your windows and circulate the air within your car to avoid bringing toxic fumes inside. So there are some very, very, very simple, basic things that individuals can take regardless of where they live. If they live near a golf course, air purifiers, asking the golf course to use less pesticides. I think most golf courses could probably use 50% less pesticides, and we'd be all better for it. You also bring up, for 10 years before I did Parkinson's research, I really was in the Huntington's disease community, which is a disease, terrible disease, defined by a single gene. A single genetic mutation is responsible for the disease. You have the genetic mutation, you get the disease. You don't have the genetic mutation, you don't get the disease. I don't think I said the word environment once. One of my colleagues, who's a neuroscientist, his name is Dr. Jeff Carroll. He's at the University of Washington. He comes from a family affected by Huntington's disease, and he unfortunately carries a genetic mutation that's responsible for the disease. This is all public, and he's discussed this openly. And so he will eventually develop this, the Huntington's disease. But he did pre-implantation genetic diagnosis to ensure that his kids don't develop the disease. And I think a lot about him. I don't think he even knows I think a lot about him. But what a courageous act. He gets to say to himself, I'm going to suffer a terrible disease, a terrible fate. But I've taken actions to make sure that my kids don't. And I think that's incumbent on us. And I know Parkinson's is terrible, and that's why we don't sugarcoat that at all. And I know it's a huge burden to bear, but I think it's our responsibility, yours, mine, collectively, to ensure that future generations don't bear the burden of this terrible disease. And we lay out a very detailed plan to make sure that that doesn't happen, so that your kids can live lives free of being worried about Parkinson's disease. So they don't have to worry about being cured of the disease. They don't have to take a medication. They don't have to do stem cells. They don't have to see a doctor every year for the next 20 years. That they should just simply live a life free of Parkinson's disease, just like we live in a world where HIV is treatable and preventable, where drinking and driving is socially unacceptable, where polio is extraordinarily rare. These are all gifts that we've received from previous generations. You have an obligation to receive a gift, and you have an obligation to reciprocate. And I can't think of a better way to reciprocate than to create a world where future generations are spared the indignity of Parkinson's disease.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been wonderful. I'm going to wrap up, and then for anybody who wants, you can stay on afterwards. We'll stop the recording in a few minutes.
So this is a plug. Michael and I are devoting all of our future proceeds from the book to efforts to prevent and end Parkinson's disease. But if we want to change the course, if we want to change the dialogue, if we want our representatives to invest more in Parkinson's, we need to get the word out. And one way is to sell the book. So the book's available right now. You can pre-order it on Amazon. You can pre-order it wherever you'd like to pre-order it. We give you a wide range of of choices. Michael and I are devoting our future proceeds to efforts to prevent and end the disease. If you would like to be part of our newsletter, I think Sharon's on our newsletter. You can just scroll down, you give us your email address and your name, and you can subscribe. It's free to do so. There's no cost at all. And then again, all of you listening, if you email me at info@endingpd.org, we'll send you a copy of our existing book. I don't have our current book right now, so I can't send it to you, but we'll send it to you for free. Just give us your mailing address and we'll send you Ending Parkinson's Disease. And if you want to share your story, if you want to be in our next book, share your story, or you have a question that we didn't get answered today, info@endingpd.org.
I'll just go through these really quickly. We've got Breakthrough Karate. August 17th, we are having Steve Cox from Espanola Glove Works, and he is working with high school and college students to make the gloves based on the research of Peter Tass, who spoke to us a couple years ago. That should be very interesting. And then on August 28th, Bill Plaschke from the LA Times, he's sports columnist who came out in public with his Parkinson's, joining us, and that will be on a Thursday at the same time. So we've got 3 great speakers, and then we are going to be funding providing grants for women going to the next World Parkinson's Congress next May in Phoenix, and scholarships applications will be available on August 1st. I will have more information on that in my blog, so watch for that if you're interested in going. It is a fabulous, fabulous experience. You will get to see Dr. Dorsey. You will get to meet him in person there, I'm sure. And other than that, we've got our usual discussion groups, and I'm going to stop sharing and just go back to where we were. So everybody, this has been wonderful. Ray, thank you again for speaking to our group. And next time you come to LA, let me know ahead of time, and I'll meet you for lunch or dinner at Steak 48 around the corner. I found out after the fact that he met his son for lunch a block away from my house.
I would be delighted to come and see all of you. And if you have additional questions, please email me. I read all the emails that come in, and we're happy to send you a copy of your book, just of our previous book. Just send us your mailing address. And please spread the word about this book. We want to get to 10,000 pre-orders. The more pre-orders we get, the more attention we get, the virtuous cycle starts, and we can be the last generation to bear the burden of Parkinson's.